So I thought the story of this episode is twofold. You giving your take on what the hell the Age of Reason was and why it was written. And I was actually surprised because I've never heard it before until 3 weeks ago. No, I'm just kidding. But I was surprised that it was written in the 1790s.
Yeah.
Thought it was like pre-Constitution kind of a thing.
Oh, yeah. No, that was common sense.
Certainly his thoughts were out there. We know about common sense. We know about the Age of Reason. He probably did other things. He probably went to coffee shops and said, hey, you want to hear my latest idea about shared ownership of stocks in the government? No. Tell us about that. Nobody's current belief in God is actually real. That it's just, God is just something we can't ever figure out what it is anyway. But we'll believe in it, but we just won't profess it. That's the reason, right?
The irony is that Thomas Paine is so fresh in the mouth of all sorts of conservatives. Glenn Beck used to go on Fox News in his Fox News days and talk up and down about how brilliant Thomas Paine was, because the thing conservatives know about Thomas Paine is that George Washington had his words, common sense, in the pamphlet Common Sense, read to the troops to boost morale. Right. And but
it's because Dr. Seuss wasn't around yet.
That's right. There's no green eggs and ham, so we're going to do this instead.
A little bit more somber tone we're going to have here.
But Common Sense was really kind of just feeling out the waters for Thomas Paine, who was a passionate deist, like most of the founders. Britt Hartley has a great episode of her show over at No Nonsense Spirituality, where she talks about if you think that the founders of this country were Christian, guess again, and she goes over how basically they were almost all the significant ones were some variation of deists. You couldn't really say that they were atheists, but many people
they were anti-religious establishments.
Right. Yeah.
They're probably, here's how my take is, there has to be a fucking God. But like all good fathers, once Earth reached 18 years old, he didn't give a shit about it anymore. We're on our own, right?
That's a quote right there. That's a clip right there. that goes in the shorts right there.
Yeah. And so like science is the new religion is basically what he's saying, sort of.
Yeah, well, his whole thing was, he was the one famously, as I understand it, to say, my religion is the world. The church, my church is the world, and to do good is my religion. And that was basic deism that most of the founders were happy to associate with when Common Sense was published. By the time that was well received, and Paine who was kind of like a rich vagrant, basically, he would just go from place to place. He would go from continent to continent, and he'd go wherever the action was. And he went back to Europe, and he's like, in America, everybody's basically deist. Even Jefferson said that once in a letter I've referred to before. I'm trying to remember if it was to Benjamin Rush or I don't remember exactly, but it was to one of the other founders, and he had said that in this country, I think it was actually to John Adams. It was one of the famous Adams Jefferson letters, and he said,
the Beer family.
What's that?
Of the Beer family. Oh no, that's Samuel Adams.
Right. Well, no, Sam Adams and John Adams were cousins, but I don't think Samuel Adams. Ironically, I don't think Samuel Adams beer actually has anything to do with the family. I don't know.
No, I think it's only like 100 years old or whatever. I don't know.
Right?
Maybe 50. Who knows?
But I think he did drink beer. I wouldn't be surprised. Sam Adams was kind of a baller, but he said here in this Protestant country, Jefferson had said, people who object to the church, the Protestant church, if you will put that all in together as one church, people who are dissenters from the church become deists. He said, but having been minister of the United States to France, having lived in a very Catholic place, a very Catholic country, and traveled in Italy, and so forth, he said in Catholic countries, the dissidents to religion become atheists. And that, I thought that was a very astute observation from him, because people do the same thing with us these days. It's like, well, evangelicals who leave, evangelical Christianity tend to become spiritual Christians, non-denominational Christians, but Mormons leave Mormonism and almost to a man they become agnostic or atheist. And so,
Right.
and I'm like,
if the only church that's true isn't true, then there's nowhere to fall.
correct. I think that's exactly right. I think you called it exactly, Jane. There is a difference on where you come from, which tradition you come from, in terms the trauma / dogmatism of that tradition will shape your post deconstruction perspective necessarily. I think that Paine, who was not an atheist, he states in The Age of Reason, and part of his reasoning for publishing The Age of Reason is that he believes in God, but he believes in, he says he believes in nature, and nature's God. Then, having established that, he starts to take down the church, he starts to take down the Bible, he starts to take down Jesus, and he starts to take down everything that people associate with either Catholicism or Protestantism, and bakes it down to what we today would call the non-religious spiritual movement, and or something like that, spiritual, not religious, or none. So these are the original none, now which now is the fastest growing movement in spiritual movement in America, and likely throughout the world. It turns out Thomas Paine is just more than 200 years ahead of his time, because when he came back to America, he suddenly finds that all of these people who were his buddies, the Washingtons, the Jeffersons, the Madisons, the people who liked him plenty when he was the author of Common Sense, suddenly won't have anything to do with him after the publication of The Age of Reason, even though prominent people in the French Revolution, prominent people in the British Reformations of religion and government, and prominent founders of the American government of America, are deists, and he just published exactly what they were thinking, what they were all in agreement on. The thing that was unique about Thomas Paine, and he says it in The Age of Reason, is that he specifically wrote it in language that was easy and plain for ordinary people who don't have high-end education, don't have multiple degrees, for ordinary people to understand, and published it in a format that was easy for ordinary people to afford to buy. And that was and some of the criticism about him from that time was that they didn't so much object to what he said, because everything he said made total sense. It wasn't so much that what he said was wrong. It was that he said it to a class of people that it was dangerous to start them talking about those ideas. This was strictly
because it was privileged information,
right? Because
it's almost like, what's his name, WikiLeaks, or
right, something like that. I mean, it was. You could compare it to something like, he was kind of almost like a Bernie Sanders kind of character, right? He was the guy who came out and said, it seems people buy into one version of who we are as a people. They don't understand that behind closed doors of the elites, everybody's admitting that that's a lie. And every person who had a university education at that time, or a private tutelage education at that time, knew controversies about the Bible that were just not common knowledge to the everyday person. And, that there were, any average person sitting in a pew would hear a preacher say, well, you look at all the gospels never contradict each other at all. And you just buy that. They complement each other, even, they'll say. And every educated person.
These are not the droids you're looking for.
Very much so, yes. And every person who was educated at that point would have said, that's just not true. They've known that for a long time, that these, and even if you just read the text with a little bit of historical context, if you read the text of the Gospels, you see these documents are very much contradictory to one another. And the story of Jesus doesn't make a lot of sense. And the more you learn about history, the more you go, this is all made up. None of this makes sense.
Right. And we can thank Dan McClellan for helping us understand that the Old Testament, every time somebody wrote something, first of all, it wasn't like original thought or anything. They were just finally writing it down. Mm-hmm. Second of all, they're writing more than likely in the name of someone else, mm-hmm. so that it would get popular.
Or plausibly in the name of no one, which when you appeal to people's common sense, ironically, oftentimes you can cause people to come up with apologetics that actually are completely misinformed by just saying, ask yourself, does this make sense? That's always should be taken with a grain of salt with history, because the more history is the more you can talk about, does this make sense?
That's right. History is nuts. And we're not talking about history books. We're talking about humans living.
Right.
Weird things happen all throughout history. But in a way, the Bible to me is, we'll say, codified, or the beginnings of writing down all of like the old wives' tales from tens of thousands of years of human development. And then throwing in mystical, magical stuff here and there because of whatever beliefs. And so now Dan McClellan is telling us that the Old Testament has nothing to do with Jesus. Right. Everything that they wrote is just for their buddies, right? At the time, they were talking to their buddies.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I wasn't watching the comments, so I don't know who was or wasn't in watching my godless sermon yesterday from when we recorded this. But I read the Thanksgiving sermon by Robert G. Ingersoll, and who is one of the people that were canonizing in the Korihor canon, several of his sermons or lectures. And in this sermon, he lays it out. This is over 100 years ago. He died in the early 20th century. And this is over 100 years ago. He lays out challenges to the Bible that still
is this a German guy?
People today.
A German guy?
No. Well, I mean, I'm sure Ingersoll. That does sound Germanic. I don't know though. But he's very American.
Okay.
Maybe German American.
I know that Bart Ehrman quotes some guy that wrote 100 and something years ago. About here's how we should look at like the Old Testament and the New Testament and stuff like that.
That very plausibly was a German guy, because that's where the center of biblical study really has been.
And Ingersoll could have drawn from some of those writings or whatever.
Certainly, yes. He was a very avid reader, and but he knows.
Yeah, because even I'm pretty sure all of the things that I say are just from inputs over 66 years, that hardly anything that I come up with is actually originates in this brain. It's just a reconfiguring of something I heard. I might add a color or a flavor to something that I'm regurgitating, but it feels good to think that I'm the one that thought of it first.
Right. And you and ChatGPT are like that.
Yeah. We hallucinate. We do all kinds of things similarly.
It turns out artificial intelligence and actual intelligence might not be all that different after all.
Yeah, I've been accused of being artificially intelligent almost all my life.
It may be that we all are, Gene. You may be like Thomas Paine, is just ahead of your time.
That's right. ChatGPT is just an electronified version of the zeitgeist.
Right. It's like it's like a teenager at this point. I think it's like it thinks it's learned to fuse
Testing
things.
boundaries.
Yeah, and now it just wants to be a little asshole and just
That's
it's
right.
got to grow up still a little bit.
It's almost like, if I say this, will this human believe it? And then all the ChatGPT minions are like high-fiving on all their stories about what they said last to some human.
Right. No, I think that Sam Altman is like the responsible parent, and Elon Musk is like the dickhole parent who's like, I'd rather you were drinking here with me.
Right. Yeah. And so Thomas Paine, I understand, wrote The Age of Reason in like 3 parts.
Correct.
And do you know when the first one was written?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I'm sure I have it in.
I think it's in the early 1790s.
Right.
And he was approaching 60. Could have been a few years away from being 60 years old. So he had lived a life. He had already gained popularity with his common sense. And I guess it's almost like common sense is like a precursor to reason. Right?
I think so.
Like common sense is just what happens. Like, hey, if something's hot, you might burn yourself if you touch it. That's common sense.
Oh, you mean the concept is? Oh, I got
right?
you.
And the age of reason, like I'm using these titles as like stepping stones, right? And the age of reason is, well, let's see how hot this hot thing is, and let's see at what temperature our skin burns, and we'll put those things on charts, and we'll test things, and we'll do scientific experiments, and we'll measure things, right? So that we can keep track of everything. And that's sort of like the difference between common sense is reason is we're going to think these things through a little bit more.
Yeah. So the first version of the first part was written in 1794. Okay. The second part in 1795, and the third part written in 1807. Wow. At about the time when he was put into prison in France, I believe. And so, he was arrested really without
for being anti-Catholic almost.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Which at that point in the Napoleonic years was anti-state. But Napoleon himself was a weird figure. This is a weird time in history religiously because it's like, Napoleon crowns himself, takes the crown away from when he crowns himself emperor, takes it away from the Pope and puts it on himself. But at the same time, it's like once the church acquiesces to the demands of the French Empire, then all of a sudden it was like, okay, now we're back in bed with the church, and the church is the state. And so, right.
So once Trump becomes king, the same. So we're watching history repeat itself in a way. Is what people are saying, watch out for, right? No more kings, right? Is kind of a thing. That's right. I also think that the age of reason and the scientific age and different things, in a way, causes people to reflect on their spirituality more. And the second great awakening occurs as a response to the growing either deist or agnostic or atheist movement. Even is like we're gonna retake things, and that spawns the burned over district, which also spawns Mormonism and
directly.
And what other religions?
Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists. Yeah. And even you could say Reformation in like the Quakers and so forth. I mean, a lot of that a lot of what we know as modern American Christianity was shaped by the Second Great Awakening. Oftentimes, I think not incorrectly, historians say that the Second Great Awakening was kind of a response to America's crisis of conscience after the War of 1812. But I think when it comes to the Second Great Awakening, as we understand it as ex-Mormons, well, those of us who identify ex-Mormon, is that Mormonism itself was really almost directly a result of the Age of Reason and the publication of the Age of Reason. And because Joseph Smith Jr.'s father, Joseph Smith Sr., received from his father, if I'm not mistaken, a copy of the Age of Reason.
Asael, or whatever his name is.
Yep. Yep. I think it was Asael, yeah. Or Asael is the grandfather. I don't remember at this moment. But I remember that it was his dad gave him that before he went off and joined one of these kooky religions, finding out that, you know, they were going through a crisis. I talked about this in an episode I haven't published yet with Robert. Why am I spacing on Robert's last name? Our friend Robert, the playwright.
Rob Lauer.
Rob Lauer. Thank you. And where he was talking about, you know, the Smiths when Joseph was really young. Every Mormon knows the story about Joseph Smith getting sick and being a sick kid for a long time, having to have an operation on his leg because that sets up that Joseph Smith didn't drink, which is a lie. He did. He drank like a fish. The other lie of that is that Joseph Smith was stupid. And that was another part. It's a central part now of the narrative of why the Book of Mormon is true, is because it came about by miraculous means, because Joseph Smith was way too much of a dummy to write a book like the Book of Mormon. Right. We now know that was total BS.
And, you know, part of that stems from his mom when she writes her book about her family and Joseph Smith. She says something about how Joseph didn't, you know, follow through on, you know, reading, you know, some of the deeper books. And I think she just meant that he didn't like textbooks and he didn't like discipline. Right. But he, on his own, educated himself by reading things, by talking to his brother, who was a student at the Dartmouth prep school, Morris College, or whatever they called it. Morris High School.
We didn't get this in the narrative we received, I think, from the church, but the years after Joseph Smith had died, there was a lot of shaming him posthumously. There was a lot of, you know, Joseph Smith was not, you know, he was a bit of a dummy. He was a bit of a fool. He was a bit of a huckster. He was a bit of a, you know, doing
in
all
popular writings or in the church.
In the church. And well, because they wanted to emphasize and to change his assassination to being about the Book of Mormon, because the Book of Mormon is the thing that all these Mormon traditions, including the Brighamite tradition, walked away with. And so Emma herself also, you know, would tell, you know, apparently had said that Joseph could hardly write a letter, right, let alone write an entire book. So there's a lot of this kind of like deprecating validation about the Book of Mormon,
in order to say how there had to be divine intervention in order for the Book of Mormon to come to pass.
Right. So that way, whoever is the church, Joseph Smith's church, whether that's what's now Community of Christ, or whether that, you know, the Josephite, the Brighamite, the, you know, the Strangites,
whatever,
the Bickertonites, whichever one is Joseph's church, they all have the Book of Mormon. They're all the Mormon churches. And so, and there was a kind of way of saying, of affirming Joseph Smith was a prophet while also dumping Joseph Smith, the man, at the same time. But now we know that Joseph Smith, at least in Nauvoo, when they started the Nauvoo Library, donated a bunch of books, including books about theology.
Yep, there are lists.
Yeah, there's an actual list that they have, that the church has, and that BYU published.
And they weren't coloring books or children's readers.
Right. No,
Yeah.
they were books on theology and philosophy and history.
And he didn't just start collecting them 6 months before he died.
No, and certainly wouldn't have started collecting them and then just donated them, especially when so many ideas, complex theological ideas, start to come out over the course of his life in these revelations. Even the King Follett sermon. If you look at the difference between the lectures on faith and the King Follett sermon, you see Joseph Smith's idea of God the Father go from a personage of spirit who has no body in Lectures on Faith to a man who was, basically a resurrected being at one point, had 10 fingers and 10 toes like anybody else, or 18 fingers and toes plus 2 thumbs, right? And it's like, of course his theology evolves. His reading is evolving. He's changing as he meets new people and as he reads more books. And so the idea that Kobe Reddish put in my head a while ago that if Joseph Smith grew up knowing the age of reason because his father had received it, and it was like in the house, it's very plausible that Joseph Smith, were he the author of at least part of the Book of Mormon, which I think he was, that Korihor could be the result of the age of reason. And
and so Joseph was pushing back against this, the scientific method and other things, because Joseph, in being a seer, had to dig down deep and say, God, if you're there, talk to me, right? And he might have had a religious experience, just like many people of the day that are printed, that are very similar stories to the first vision. Mm-hmm. And nobody even knew about the first vision until like 12 years later and stuff like that. Anyway, and just back for a second on the point of all the ites. At the beginning of this year, I believe, they were talking about, I went to church, the Brighamite church, that is my home ward. They were discussing like the witnesses of the Book of Mormon. Mm. And it was mentioned that the teacher, his great-great-great-grandfather or something, was commissioned by the church to go get some portraiture of a couple of the witnesses that they didn't have portraiture in Salt Lake City, because they wanted to reproduce those things in manuals and stuff like that. Hmm. And so Martin Harris's family said no flat out at first, but then Martin Harris was in Utah, and then this guy went to David Whitmer, right? And David Whitmer told this teacher's great-great-great-grandfather his testimony, right, of the Book of Mormon. Mm-hmm. And like, see, even the witnesses didn't lose their testimonies. And I said, well, it would kind of make sense that David Whitmer would still have a testimony of the Book of Mormon, because at the time that this is happening, David Whitmer is the president of his church, which is called the Church of Christ, and their main book, along with the Bible, is the Book of Mormon.
Correct.
And I threw that out there just to get people thinking, oh, history. Is he telling the truth? Let me look that up, right? Just to throw something out there, a little bit more real history, right? It would make sense that the guy would have a testimony of it if he's preaching out of it. Mm-hmm. And so, but is he preaching out of it in the Brighamite church? No, he's preaching out of it in the Church of Christ, which is, hey, wasn't that the original name of the church?
Right.
All this stuff, right? And so back to the age of reason now. And the reason why we're having this whole discussion is that you are in the process of canonizing the age of reason.
Correct.
Right? And so are you going to synopsize it? Are you going to retranslate things that, are you going to bring it into our modern English? Some things that he says, are you going to use AI
No, I'm using one of the translations. I have it in my notes here, which one of the translations of the original document. So the document I'm trying to keep the documents that we're canonizing, because there are several that we're canonizing at the same time. In the future, when we do canonization events at the Church of Korihor, we'll probably do one at a time. But right now, we got to get a volume put together that publishes. This is so far what we've come up with, and and so this will be the first edition that we're going to publish on Sunday.
And you're going to call your book of scriptures Doctrine but No Covenants.
Even that's a little too churchy for the Church of Korihor. No, we're calling it the Korihor canon.
Right. And it's basically, you're going to say, this isn't from God, this is from human minds, and these are really good suggestions, and we desire all to receive it.
That's right.
All arise.
I mean, it is spiritual wisdom from atheist or agnostic or godless minds, if you will, or appeals to godless reason. And so even though some of the writings are by deists, or, like Thomas Paine, who, like I said before, in the Age of Reason, Thomas Paine says he believes in God. But he just doesn't think that any of the world's religions get it right. So, of course, those religions think he is an atheist, accuse him of being an atheist. It's the same thing I mentioned yesterday from when we recorded this in my sermon, that, when John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were running against each other right in the middle of the publication of The Age of Reason in the year 1800, Adams and the Federalists accused Jefferson of being an atheist. And that was one of the major contentions that Jefferson threw back in his face years later after they reconciled, because he was dead to him for a while, and they had served together. Jefferson was his vice president, and so and so he's like, that was one of the major things he said that Adams had really pissed him off with, is when he had accused him of being an atheist. And even though it was the editors of Federalist-owned papers, it's like, it's as if I don't know that it's you. Somewhere you had an influence. You could have stopped somebody from saying these things about me. But the fact of the matter is, atheist is a label. People say to me all the time, if you claim to not know whether or not there is a God, you can't be an atheist. I don't realize the history of this word. This word, in our modern context especially, is a way for believers to accuse other people of believing incorrectly, not of believing that there is no God. But
right, not having no belief in God, but believing that there is no God. Those are two different things.
Right. And really that only exists in a context of churches and traditions that believe in this idea of one true church, that there is only one true church. And
let me say real quick about the word atheist. It comes from a Greek word that had its origins in the 5th century BCE, and it was used as a slur against people who did not have a belief in any of the gods that existed at the time, right? Because there were a plethora, right? And that this word was anglicized in the 1600s, similarly, because as there was growing antagonism toward the Catholic Church and toward the Christian God, they wanted to have a word to point at people and demonize or otherwise denigrate them.
Right.
And so it just means lack of belief in a deity.
Yeah, I would say it means different things to different people.
Right. And the words meanings do change now. But
right. Yeah,
but that's the essence of the word is a lack of belief.
Yeah. Well, and but at the same time, it's like, well, then what does agnostic mean, right? You can say agnostic people means people by the actual Greek of the words,
Not knowing.
Agnostic means you don't know, you claim to not know, and atheist means to claim to have no belief in God. But if that's the case, who is an atheist? Like, who actually, like, who, and this is, people try to, in the apologist camp, try to point out that there's hypocrisy among those people who claim to be atheists. And I say, who are they? Because if you badger, Christopher Hitchens never really solidly identified with atheism, even though he wrote a book called God Is Not Great. But he was proud to admit, if I found compelling reasons to believe in God, I would believe. Neil deGrasse Tyson, there's a whole an interview he did on Big Think, where he says, I tried to get into my own Wikipedia page, which you're not supposed to do, but people do it all the time. And he's like, because my Wikipedia page said that I was an atheist. And he said, and I'm not. And so he said, and so I had it changed to say agnostic. And then whoever had put atheist, as soon as I had changed it, went in there and changed it back. And so he said, so I asked somebody to go in there. I said, I just gave up on it and said, just change it one last time and say, well, often accused of being an atheist.
Right. That way it's still the word there.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's just like with Neil deGrasse Tyson, being accused of being an atheist becomes a part of your story, regardless of whether or not you want it to be. And that's why I say it's a label. It's a thing that's used to otherize people. And so, right. And similarly, that's what happened with Paine.
So fill in the blank, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Atheist, using that nickname, is a victory for blank.
Christian, mainly.
That's right. Using the word atheist is a victory for Christians only.
The Sam Harris, in his most controversial talk ever, Sam Harris, the author of The Age of Reason, the author of The End of Faith, as well as other books, neuroscientist, and perhaps one of the most well-known atheist minds, one of the four horsemen of atheism, as they were called.
Is he the last of the four horsemen?
No, because Dawkins is still alive. But
Dawkins is still alive?
Yeah. And so, but he's close. And the other person on that panel, by the way, was going to be Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and we've kicked her ass out. However formal atheism is, ever since she proclaimed herself a cultural Christian, it's like, well, she's out. But Sam Harris, after the publication of The End of Reason, went to a Skepticon, which is an atheist convention, and basically was asked to speak, behind a lectern about how Skepticon shouldn't exist, or at least that's how he took it. And
that's right. I would be a skeptic. It's just I'm not so sure about that.
Right. Well, and he was skeptical of the word atheist. And he said every time that we identify as atheists, it's like Christians drew a chalk outline on a crime scene and atheists walk up and lie down in it. And this has been one of the interesting things about atheism, is there has been over at least 30 years and a progressive movement, disjointed and disorganized movement among atheists to rebrand atheism. And so far, it has been utter failure. But originally, it was that we were going to take a page out of the playbook of gay people and say, just take a word that they're already using and let's co-opt it. Let's all agree this is now what that means. And the word that they tried to rebrand as the new version of atheist was bright. Every time you say bright, just like people who say, now apparently we can't say gay, kids these days aren't going to understand what we mean by this. But those of us from, our generation, if you and I are the same generation, I remember hearing people say, oh, now it's in Christmas songs. You can't co-opt a word identified by a word that's in Christmas carols. And it's like they totally can. And because they persisted with it, now gay means gay. And so if atheists just stick to it, we'll make it so that every time people say bright, they mean godless, they mean atheist.
That's right. I would say to people, I'm not gay, but I'm very, very, very happy.
So you were gay once. Once upon a time. Yeah, I mean, the bright didn't stick because, frankly, atheists are too skeptical of everything, too much of critical thinkers to immediately adopt something like that.
Plus, bright has something to do with Christmas too, right? Star bright. Oh no, that's the stars, the evening star.
Star night, star bright. That's right.
There's probably bright in some Christmas carol.
I'm sure there is if I sit and think about it. But
I was so bright that my father called me son.
I haven't heard that one. Maybe that's the problem, is that we'll be associated with too many dad jokes.
I guess it also would infer that everybody else who's not bright is dim.
So that was
a reverse slur,
right? Just like gay, everybody being homosexual or gay means everybody who is straight is miserable, and that was part of it. There was
right. And a very popular form of early Christianity was knowers, right? Oh, we are knowing. We are the Gnostics. The other people, they don't know the secrets. We know the secrets.
The mysteries.
It wasn't until the all the conferences of the Catholic Church, the creeds were coming out, that they finally tamped down the people who said that we have the special knowledge. We are the Gnostics.
Yeah, I mean, Gnostic is another interesting story, to agnostic, comparing to agnostic. The two have nothing to do with one another, except that they both came about in more or less the same way. It was a way of identifying other people, and with a word that doesn't directly reflect what their actual system of belief was. It was a label, so in a lot of ways that's like atheist as well. But because the Gnostics, like, they're mostly African Christians, as I understand it, and Mediterranean Christians, who largely their belief was that you shouldn't canonize the story of Jesus because the story of Jesus is given by revelation. So they have gospels that would circulate, but frankly, it was what's written down about Jesus was not as important as knowing the revelation from Jesus.
The testimony within, not the written word.
Right. Which was branded as heresy by Irenaeus, I believe. And in
Would you
his
call me?
heresies. What's that?
I said, would you call me?
Irenaeus was a French bishop, if I remember, and he wrote a 5-volume series on heresies. And it's largely because of his work that we know about several of these early Christian communities at all, is skepticism from that part, which, as I understand it, most people today, most historians today will say, and we don't even know necessarily which parts were by him, because a lot of it appears to be to have been edited by other Catholic bishops, so other fathers. So it's like
right, and that reminds me. There's another French writer that if he didn't write his stuff, we wouldn't even know what hell was.
Is that Voltaire?
Voltaire, right?
Was it? I don't know.
I think it's Voltaire, and because there was no real concept of hell, it wasn't even a thing 500 years ago or whatever.
Right.
It's a modern creation.
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, the idea of Lucifer being the devil is also a somewhat modern creation.
Sure.
It seems strange to us, I think, it would seem strange to me to even conceive of that idea now. But so much of what we understand as Christianity today is a
common
very,
knowledge in Christianity was created over the years.
right. I
And
mean,
the Greek
there are,
fans of the philosopher will say the philosopher politician Jesus or Yeshua of Nazareth, they created him as the Son of God and even as God, hundreds of
yeah,
years after Yeshua's death.
right. One of the big controversies in biblical studies now is this concept that of Jesus claiming that he was God. People who are educated in the Bible, who are deeply spiritual, will say, well, yeah, there's this passage here, there's this passage there, where Jesus basically means to say that he is God. That anybody who is not deeply religious and is a biblical scholar will tell you that's not at all what the passage said.
Right.
And again, it's like the movies like The Exorcist have shaped the way that we understand Christianity now. Hollywood is now a contributor to how we understand Christianity, and to assume that that's the way Christianity always was is absurd the more you look into it. Well,
Yeah, it'd be like if we were able to transport ourselves 1,000 years into the future and everybody was worshiping Superman. Because why not?
why would they have made all these movies about him if he weren't a real guy, right?
Yeah.
That's the same logic by
We have
which,
more documentation about Superman being real than we do of Jesus, or even of what do they say? One of the famous Roman emperors.
yeah.
Who's the most famous? Julius
Oh,
Caesar, right?
yeah.
There's more
They
scribbles of
usually
writing about
Alexander the Great.
Jesus,
Yeah.
right, and stuff like that. And so
Yeah.
it's like, there were fan fiction back in the day.
Except that Alexander the Great, we have a coffin that he's not in, but was commissioned by him, a very ornate coffin that was made for him, that's like carved
Right.
with
And
reliefs.
coinage and
Yeah,
things
I'm
like
pretty
that.
sure. Yeah, I've seen that, I believe.
And
And then
you
contemporary.
and I aren't even really people unless they make coins out of us. 1,000 years from now, I don't think people are going to say, "Hey, you remember Gene Judson and Joe Rawlins?"
Let's get
Oh,
right
yeah.
on it, man. We gotta mint some history here.
Yeah.
But
And so back to the Age of Reason. So
mhm.
you want to canonize it. Do you know the three different things and what they each were?
Yeah, but it's quite extensive.
Right. So we'll say it in brief because you are going to canonize them, and part of this is to give people a taste of the information.
Yeah.
Just like getting a taste that David Whitmer had a testimony of the Book of Mormon because he started a church using it, and he was the president, and the church that he had started was actually not even what he considers as starting, but is the original church that Joseph started, the Church of Christ, and that Joseph bastardized it as well as Brigham Young. And so the Church of Christ needed to be sort of reinstated by David Whitmer using the Book of Mormon. So,
Right. And I would say that the main, without breaking it down necessarily by the parts, the main thread,
Rust.
yeah, if you will, the main thread of ideas in the Age of Reason is first to point out the hypocrisy of religion, of organized religion, and then to expose the flaws in the Bible, particularly, and in the story of particularly of Jesus.
So you
And
have to deconstruct something before you reconstruct something in its place.
exactly, and then particularly a call to reform society to secularize, and that's where it really becomes. I think if there is a sacred canon of a godless church and of godless people, it is this it is secularism. People have pointed out, I think you actually, one of our a comment on one of
Our
my
shows.
sermons. What's that?
On one of your sermons, I
Yeah.
commented. What did I say? That was so
You
brilliant.
said something. I want to know maybe it was you, maybe it was somebody else, but it said that I want to know how one of the values of a church is secularism. Was that you?
Could have been.
Maybe it was somebody else, but anyway, I thought it was a great question because one of the 12 values of cohortism is secularism, and the I consider secularism to be sacred, which is to say specifically that, like James Madison said, that the church and the state are each maintained more pure the less they are mixed together. That there is a spiritual growth that is so individualized by the time the government gets involved in it, there really is no way for government to get involved in it without trampling on the rights of citizens, because it will definitely prioritize one group over another, and that's such an individualized pursuit, the pursuit of spirituality, that you really can't help but trample on somebody's rights. And we live in a day and age now, under what I would argue is Christofascism, where that just completely gets disregarded. That secularism that was so important in the revolution and in the founding of the United States, that's been not just neglected, it is outright opposed by certain legislators in Congress, and I would argue certainly by the current president in the White House.
Right. And you could say that secularism means the separation of church and state.
Right. I mean, there's a dictionary definition, but that is basically what it is. And it is exactly what the Age of Reason ultimately is trying to argue for, is that somebody like Thomas Paine should be able to be living in Napoleonic land and say anything about any religion, including Christianity, and not fear being arrested. And ultimately that comes to be the end of his story, is that he predicted that was the society, the age that we were living in, and he was ultimately rejected by his society, not because he was wrong, but because they were angry that he wanted to get the working class involved in it, that he wanted ordinary people to understand the world has changed. The elites behind closed doors know it. And
Who said religion is the opiate of the masses?
Yeah, that was Marx that said that.
Yeah. And in a way, Marx is just repeating that thought.
100%.
And the world leaders want that opiate in the working class.
Correct.
Because if you believe you're going to go to hell if you don't do a good job working for me, then you might come into conflict with our values. Our values might conflict with each other.
Yeah, I think that Marx, as I understand it, didn't mean it the way that we quoted to say it. He meant it compassionately, that he thought that religion was
soothing.
And
like
in
medicine.
And in that, I would say most of the deists felt that way at the time. Most of the deists who were founders of America did. I mean, that's the way that James Madison, in that quote that I just told, well, not direct quote, but that passage I just referred to, he was referring to the church as being the heart of the nation and the government being the head of the nation. While it's important for the government to keep order and to keep laws and to be skeptical and to be critical and to negotiate and be about the business of a nation, it's important for the church to exist, was basically his argument.
Yeah, it's almost like James Madison was saying, where will they go if you take religion away from them?
Yeah, you could say it that way. Yeah, it was about the very fact that the government doesn't tell them what they can preach, and the preacher doesn't tell the government what laws to pass, is the exact reason why both of them work so well. And let people go to church on Sunday or not, or Saturday or not. Let them worship or not worship as they like. And the more that they do it, the more moral they will become. It was basically his argument, his feeling. And
Right.
most of the deists, I think, would agree with that.
There's a lot of things, that we take for granted, or that like always existed. Like it always existed that in God we trust was on our coins and on our dollars. It's like, no, that's just a recent phenomenon based on people that wanted to creep more of religion into government,
Right. That was a reaction
to
to
communism and things like that.
That's exactly, to the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union officially embraced atheism, but and so people, and that just made it a target by preachers who wanted to say, oh well, you see, anybody who doesn't believe in God is going to be a communist, which is the same thing that the Pope had said. At I'm trying to remember which Pope it was. I think it was Pius X, who had published a document basically saying on behalf of the Vatican that that the Jews had influenced the thought of behind communism that had led people to monism or materialism, and that this materialism is the only way, this materialist ideal is the only reason why monarchs are being overthrown by democracy. And again, the people forget this was a time when the Catholic Church, and Christianity was very much divided over the fact that that if you believed in democracy, you were against God, because God ordained kings and queens and the ruling class to rule over you. After all, that's what Paul argues for in the New Testament. And the Pope himself was at that time the king in the Papal States. And so, we forget this sometimes. We have collectively forgotten this. But the march towards secularism and the march towards democracy was the same fight. And
Joseph
ultimately,
Smith was anointed king, even though the Book of Mormon is very much about democracy.
yeah.
And Joseph did love democracy, but once you feel that you can be anointed king and you tell people to do it, it kind of takes over.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that he claimed to believe in democracy when he was young. Then, as he experienced it, he became disenamored with it, especially as he realized he wasn't as popular as he thought he was.
Right.
But yeah, I think that the Age of Reason, it really was a document ahead of its time, and now in the 2000s, it is a spiritual guide for our time, because it is documenting how this movement has come of age. And the Age of Reason is now. It certainly started with the Enlightenment, and Paine was a direct product of the Enlightenment.
And I'm going to call this modern information age the second great enlightenment.
I like it. I'm into it.
But I also am going to fight back a little bit, because if you think about it, if you use reason, enlightenment should have been what religiosity should have been called, and awakening should have been what reasoning is.
Oh, 100%.
Because if you say awake, you have your faculties. You see that the sun rises every day and that apples fall from trees. There's gravity, there's natural laws, nature exists, and you're awake to those things.
And that most of those things were discovered by people who believed in God. But we're open to saying, maybe we don't entirely understand what God is just because of what's written down in a book. And the more rigid that Christianity particularly became, and religion became, and no, our book is the true book, their book is the bullshit, is the more held back they became. The more dogmatic, the more they were held back by progress. Robert G. Ingersoll was pointing out 100 years ago that everybody knows in his time, in his day and age, that the Bible does say that the earth is flat. And it was wrong when it said that. And he said that up until Magellan circumnavigated the globe in the 16th century, nobody, nobody wanted to say it for fear of offending the church and offending the religious. But when he left Seville, Spain, going west, and then still going west to right back in Seville, or is it Seville? Yeah. And anyways, when he left Europe and then came right back to the same port without turning around, they knew for sure that not only was the earth round, but that the Bible was wrong. And so, even though...
Right. And if you think about it, one of the things I say about current flat earthers is, 3,000 years ago, the Greeks knew the earth was a globe. And the reason why, because they had trade, they knew how long a 3-foot high post shadow was cast at Alexandria. And they knew how long it was cast at some other place, Capernaum, I don't know, and then some other place in north of Greece, right? And they knew that the shadow got longer. And the reasonable, rational thing was to think that the sun was far away and that the earth was curved and that the rays of the sun would cast different shadows based on where it was on a globe. And they came very close to the size of the globe, of how many miles it was.
Yeah, Eratosthenes, who was basically the official scientist of Alexandria, when the library was there, he had this experiment done where they measured these two poles' shadows at the same time on the same day, and using geometry, using math, guessed it almost exactly the circumference of the earth. And which tells you not that he thought to himself, I'm going to prove to people the world is round. He was thinking at the time, I'm going to prove to people that math will show the circumference, which means that Eratosthenes must have understood that at that time that he's not the only one who knows this, that it's just common knowledge, like you're saying. It's just common knowledge among educated Greeks that the earth is a globe.
And it took religion to dim that knowledge.
Correct.
And we call it the medieval times the Dark Ages. And part of that, if you think about it, was the spread of Christianity and other religions, will say, that made things dogmatic instead of incrementally gaining more knowledge based on observing the natural world. And so, and even like the Arabs, they had great scientists. They were approximate to Alexandria.
Right.
They had access to the knowledge. They were smart thinkers. The Magi that visited Jesus came from the East, right?
Right.
And there's all this knowledge that existed. And it wasn't until you put in God says this or whatever, it dims the thing. And it like dawned on me like a bolt from heaven, a lightning bolt. We use Arabic numbers. Yeah. Algebra is named after an Arab. Right?
It's an Arabic word, yeah.
And so all these things is like, and the other thing is like the realization at the same time, like that's Gene. Like the globalization of Gene, right? and here we have Odin's Day and Thor's Day and Freyr's Day, right? Mm-hmm. The travel, the mercantilism of the Norse, they weren't just invaders, they were businessmen. They came from the north, and they were businessmen. And in order to do business, you have to tell the time, right? And you have to approximate the right day so that you can meet with somebody to make a business transaction.
Yeah.
So we're going to standardize the days' names. We're going to standardize numbers. And all these things are because the Norse and the Middle Easterners all had great knowledge and all were great traders. And, Marco Polo, he didn't create the navigation to to get the spices and things like that. He just popularized the trade routes. Right. And so all those things, like the world was really connected thousands of years ago because of actual knowledge and actual civilization and actual trade.
And that it was what we call the Dark Ages, were really the golden era of Islam. Because, and Robert G. Ingersoll wrote about this, or spoke about this. He referred to them as the Saracens. I mean, I guess that's okay back in the days of the Crusaders anyways. But he points out correctly, the reason why we have the writings of the Greek philosophers is because of Muslims, is because
they preserve the knowledge.
Preserved the knowledge of the pagans, while Christianity was burning their books and burning people at the stake for worship, for being witches.
So it almost seems like you're against book burnings.
It is very much that. I often wonder how a person gets radicalized to the point where you say, this book is wrong, so wrong it should cease to exist. I can imagine myself getting pushed to that limit. I don't know how, but a lot of that, I spoke about this in my sermon that Hitler was bad. People know that the books were burned by the Reich in Germany. Very few people, I find, know which books they were. It wasn't just you hear, well, they were books by Jews, largely, or they were accused of being books by Jews, but a lot of them were books copies of books about communism, which again at that time in Catholic dominated Europe, according to the Pope, communism was a product of Jewish thought, monism, materialism, and by extension, and by extension, atheism, democracy are all products of Jews getting in the mix in academia. And it was German students who gathered together to burn these books. And the idea was, and one of the major things that they were passionate about destroying in German thought was anything that challenged conventions about binary gender. And in Germany at that time, in Berlin, you had some of the most progressive movement, maybe the most progressive movement ever, towards transgender people and normalizing the existence of transgender people. And that was lumped in with everything else because a lot of German people associated transgenderism with, or transgender people, with the elites living in Berlin, and ignoring, they thought,
hedonism.
Right. Hedonism and godlessness. And when you have that to otherize with people and tell them your current troubles, which Germans had a lot of troubles at that time, your troubles are because these people are wicked, and their ideas have been wickedly infused. These ideas have been wickedly infused by Jews in our society who are foreigners to our land. That's the way Hitler,
that's right. There's nothing more uniting than identifying a common enemy.
Right. And that common enemy, always throughout the history of societies, the easiest target is immigrants. Immigrants, and he's like, these people, they are not from our blood. They are not from our history. They are not noble Nordic people. And so, of course, now they are infiltrating our society, and we don't even recognize ourselves as Germans anymore. Well, it's easy to criticize that if it's, 1920s, 1930s Germany. It's another thing to say, you take that and look it up on a Google search of something that's being said in Germany today, and you'll find there are people in government in Germany today saying the same thing about Muslims. These people are not from our land. They're not from our traditional people. They don't honor our traditions. And it's the same thing. It's easy to say that's happening in Europe. Okay, put it in Google and look up the same things in America. In the American government, you'll find the same things here. Dearborn, Michigan, you can't even recognize it. It's almost like it's not American, it's Muslim. Wait a minute. That's a dichotomy. You're either American or Muslim, and it's weird for me as an agnostic and an atheist to say, hey, leave the Muslims alone.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, that's key.
Do you see that the Age of Reason is actually a document that can unite mankind?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And furthermore, I think that the speeches, the lectures of Robert Ingersoll can do the same. I even think that the story of Korihor from the Book of Mormon does the same. I think that the Age of Reason is an age of saying, let us respect the religion, the spiritual pursuits and the religions of individual people. But let us do it by defrocking churches from any authority and saying, let them exist just like a marketplace of ideas, let them exist in a marketplace of belief. And may the best beliefs win out. Because what you will find is that there is no church, no God whose prayers will prove more effective than medicine. And medicine is the product of science.
Right. Like, people think that Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead was amazing, was incredible. And just think of how many, maybe thousands of times per month, modern technology revives somebody who's dead.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Age of Reason is doing that. And everybody just thinks, oh, that's just a matter of course. That's just what should naturally happen now.
Right.
But it was big news 2,000 years ago.
Right. Yeah. It's like Ingersoll said about, he said, we already in the 19th century, he said, people forget this, but once upon a time, the church tried to convince us all, was trying to convince us all that to pursue medical treatment was to express disbelief in God.
Right.
That you come to the church to heal your sickness because sickness is not a scientific matter. Sickness,
a spiritual matter.
Yep. It is.
Yeah.
It is punishment from God, and delivery is delivered by God.
On my way out of the belief, I surmised 10 years ago that whatever God could do, let's say it's 100 things. 2,000 years ago, only God could do these 100 things. By 2015, mankind could do 90 of those things.
Right.
What is going to happen when the other 10 man can do better than God? So all 100 of God's exclusive powers are just within the hands of technology. Right. What's that going to do to religion? And so that was one of my first thoughts as I was thinking things. And around that time, I wanted to be a modern Mormon Martin Luther. And I wanted to attach 100 things wrong with the Mormon church, right? And my son said, well, how many of these things would the church have to agree with for you to go back to church? And I would say, well, 30 of them is like too little, right? And if they agreed with all 100, then I know the church isn't true, because that would make me smarter than all the prophets in the Mormon church, right?
Mm.
So maybe 60. If they did 60 of my things, I could say, well, there's still some room for improvement, but at least it's better than it was. It's safer, it's healthier. And that was been my mantra. I have relatives, I have friends that are still in the church, and I want the church to be safer and healthier for them. But I also want, let's say, somewhere to go for them. And the Church of Korihor could be a place for those people who are leaving belief and starting to believe in the mind and reason, in civilization, in humanity.
Yeah. And I can't stress this enough. A place, not the place.
Right.
There are, the ideas of, us versus them were fine, worked fine for a while for Christianity. But in the age of reason, I think that we have to comprehend that not only is there a plurality of different ways of believing in the world, but also over the course of your life, there's an ebb and flow of belief and disbelief. And that is not a shameful thing. It's a beautiful thing, and it's an important thing. And that's part of and your spiritual journey is being shaped all the time by the events of your life, by your memories, by your hopes. And that path, it's not an either or path to say you are growing spiritually as a person, to say, well, that's only okay for religious people or people who believe in God. Now, it's true about everybody. And a lot of us as atheists have, those of us who identify as atheists and agnostics, we've had to come around on that because the church hurt was so real when we left. And like we talked about recently, you and I and Bug Brockway and Tim Rathbone, about how,
what life was like as an ex-Mormon before the Mormon stories and other
and social media
resources and social media was big.
Right. Yeah, that it has changed. And now we
There
are
are communities.
but now we're seeing a day when uh, more people, social media and access to information and access to the stories about trauma have changed have changed people's beliefs in church and leaving church and deconstruction, not just among Mormons. That's close to us. The Jehovah's Witnesses are having perhaps the biggest, most scandalous falling out with their church in history. The Scientologists are experiencing the same thing.
They're just not as good at storytelling as John Dehlin is with Mormon stories, but they're getting better.
Yeah, I mean, they've got Leah Remini, and their dissenters are sore and bitter, and people point to that. Of course, they're sore and bitter, and just ex-Mormons are sore and bitter. There's hurt, there's real trauma involved,
and there's actually recognizable crimes that these institutions are foisting on their ex-members.
Yeah, absolutely, and crimes on their members that are coming to light, as we see with this Wade Christofferson business. It's
so Joe, another thing about life events is they cause our timelines to need to be adjusted. And I know that you probably would already want the Age of Reason to be canonized, but life events happen. But do you have a reasonable, foreseeable future for the canonization of some of these things to happen?
Yeah. So on the 28th, on Sunday, this coming Sunday, we'll be holding the first ever canonization event. And that's when.
And say what time and what time zone?
It's going to be 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Standard godless sermon time for the Church of Korihor this coming Sunday.
And I will say that I have been making godless money on most Sunday mornings, and I've been missing your sermons lately. If you've wondered where I was, I've been Uber eating because I love money because I love to eat, and it takes money to eat, and so
Right. And you
I
got to
have
go
that.
to Thailand.
Yeah, and I got to go to Thailand to different things,
Yeah.
and so thanks, Joe, for talking about this, and it is timely, and I'm glad that we're doing this. I'm hoping that we get it out just prior to Thanksgiving so people can give thanks for the coming canonization of the Age of Reason. And
I love
so
it.
thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you to your watchers, to your listeners.
So for the 3 people that have made it this far, if you haven't already liked and subscribed to our channel, that it would be much appreciated. And I need to start saying that towards the beginning more. Other people do it so professional and so well. I should record like 5 or 6 other podcasters saying, hey, everybody, thanks for, like and subscribe. And because they say it so well, and I should just do like a montage as the beginning of my shows so that I don't have to say it.
You should. Each one of these interviews, you should have somebody say it.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking like Johnny Harris, if he ever says, hey, I really appreciate when you guys subscribe, I'll just clip that out. I don't think it would be against any copyrights if I just did a short little thing like that. But I might as well do it just to see, right?
Right.
Anyway, thanks everybody for watching. Go check out the canonization of the Age of Reason this Sunday, and 2025 is approaching the end, and Jesus hasn't come yet, although there's been multiple predictions over the last few years. There is recently multiple true believing members have had leaders come to their gathering places and hint that Jesus is just around the corner. And all I could say about that is for pretty much 1,980 or 90 years, people have been looking for Jesus to come again and bless us with his presence. And he's neglected to do that. So just consider that as how attentive Jesus is to humankind's needs. So with that, I'll close and say everybody have a great rest of 2025. Bye-bye.